Begin. So I would like to welcome everyone to our conversation on child marriage and child protection. I'm Linda Jackson. I'm the president and founder of the Association for Community Empowerment Solutions, ACES World. On behalf of our team, I would like to thank you for joining our series of conversations about girls' education. So just a bit about us. ACES World works to support women and girls in Colombia, Uganda, and Ghana, and we work toward gender equality and supporting women and girls to achieve their full potential. Our activities, skills, and knowledge clubs, our Ask for Girls clubs, use a unified approach to sexuality, life skills, human rights education to help young women develop the capacity to enjoy and advocate for their rights to dignity, equality, and healthy lives. So our girls clubs are currently operating in Ghana and in Kenya with our partner Toto Center Initiative. As by the end of August, we'll have 900 girls in 2 countries participating in our girls clubs, and we're super excited about that. We also founded the Gender Equality Data Collaborative, and the Data Collaborative works with NGO members to assist them with, obviously, data collection. So right now there are 50 members in 10 countries, and we also offer them a in-kind grant that would allow us to help them collect data using our Data for Equality tool. So if you'd like to learn more about any of these things, or just to learn more about our work as we go along, feel free to follow us on social media at ACES World for All or visit our website. So next, I'd like to certainly, tell you how pleased we are to have Hannah Fisher-Jones and Zoe Birchall, both from Girls Not Brides, here with us today to discuss the Girls Not Bride thematic brief on child marriage and child protection. So welcome, Hannah and Zoe.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Lovely to see you all.
Lovely to be with you all today.
Thank you. And so Girls Not Brides is a global network of more than 1,500 civil society organizations from over 100 countries committed to ending child marriage and ensuring girls can reach their full potential. At Girls Not Brides, Hannah is a safeguarding manager providing advice and expertise to the Girls Not Brides secretariat staff, member organizations, as well as many country organizations and national and state partnerships across numerous initiatives and processes. Zoe is a senior global policy and advocacy officer at Girls Not Brides that develops global level campaigns and advocacy initiatives to help end child marriage, as well as supporting the collective engagement of Girls Not Brides' 1,500 members in global advocacy on the issue. So again, welcome again, Hannah and Zoe, and thank you everyone else for joining us. Every year, 12 million girls marry before the age of 18 around the world. Child marriage disproportionately affects girls and denies them their fundamental rights to health, safety, and education. Can you tell me, or would you be willing to talk to us a bit about how COVID-19 has impacted child marriage?
Thanks so much, Linda. And I'll jump in on this question. Just to start off with, that this is such an important area of work. Over the last 18 months, the COVID-19 pandemic has really impacted all of us in many ways. And unfortunately, this also includes child marriage and many girls who have been forced out of school and ended up in a marriage due to this. UNICEF have predicted that there will be 10 million additional child marriages due to the COVID pandemic implications by 2030. And this is on top of the 100 million girls that are already predicted to be married by by this point. So we can see that it has had, a big impact that we need to address. And if we dive down into that, we can really see that the reason COVID has impacted so many different girls is that it exacerbates the drivers of child marriage. So we have seen an increase in poverty thanks to the pandemic. And we know from years of research that poverty really drives child marriage. Often girls and their families see the only route out of poverty is by marrying their daughters off. And this has only been exacerbated in times of crisis. We've also seen in the cases of education, the fact that as schools close, as classrooms close, and girls are forced back at home, there seems to be no viable option other than child marriage. So we have seen a big increase that way as well. So what we are really looking for now at Girls Not Brides and across our partnership are ways that we can really see how to build back better from this pandemic and how to build back up the education systems, the child protection systems, the health systems, to fully support girls so that they have a viable alternate option to child marriage and can actually get back in to their schools and provide that access to education as opposed to child marriage.
Thank you, Zoe. So a child protection system consists, according to your brief, on interlinking community, district, and national level components organized around a common goal of preventing, mitigating, and responding to neglect, exploitation, and violence against or affecting children. Will you explain those linkages to our audience, please?
Sure, thank you so much. I'll jump in here. So when we think about these three different levels of child protection, we can see that there are different aims and focuses of each section when it comes to protecting children and preventing violence against children. When we think about the ultimate aim of any child protection system will be that all children across that location will have the same access to the support that they have a right to receive, wherever they are and whatever kind of location or context they might be living in. And the key thing of these three different levels really is that they can all interconnect, that they all talk to each other, and that there's a collaboration between all of them. We see that at the community level, community-based organizations, community-based protection services will have specific knowledge and information about children's lived experiences in that location, in that context, that you're not going to be able to get at the same level at a district or a national level. By having that kind of really good, thorough, detailed knowledge of what a child is going through and what a child's lived experience is, they can then advocate for further protection that might be needed at a district level. And at a district level, it might be that there is further resource thinking about child protection information systems, thinking about more coordinated efforts across a larger area to protect children. But both of those levels will need support at the national level too, thinking about policies, thinking about laws, in order to be able to function well. Having that support at the national level and the right messaging, the right consistent messaging at a national level will help all three levels to protect children well and fully.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. So several years ago, I had the opportunity to be part of a discussion about child marriage in Uganda with a committee of the Ugandan Parliament. And while the laws are certainly in place there, getting those laws enforced on the local level can be extremely challenging. And so my question is, have you found, what strategies have you found to be successful to get local officials to enforce the laws that prohibit child marriage?
This is something that we've also seen as a challenge across our work at Girls Not Brides. So consistently, we have seen governments make international commitments to ending child marriage. We've seen governments put in place laws or put laws into their law books, but then there faces a block where these laws are not being funded and they're not being implemented, and we're not seeing the effect at the district or subnational level. So we have really worked hard with our members to explore ways to get around that challenge. And I think there are a few, I guess, key advocacy techniques and strategies that we have found particularly useful. I think firstly, it's working in partnership. We all know that by ourselves, our voices can be quite weak, but when we come together, we are heard much more strongly and we can really amplify our message. So my first point would be connect with other civil society organizations working on your issue in your local context or country. And actually, one of the things we do at Girls Not Brides is connect our members across the different regions. So if you were interested in finding out what other organizations are working on child marriage near you, you can come to us and we can put you in touch. Secondly, I think it's the importance of having really well thought out advocacy strategies and very clear targeted messaging. So this is around knowing exactly what laws are in place. It's around knowing why these laws aren't being implemented, why they're not trickling down. And it's about knowing particularly the budget side of it, I think, where the finance is missing, where the funding is missing, and what you're calling on to be changed. So if you develop a clear strategy and clear messaging, I think that can be a really important asset in helping you achieve change. I know there are a whole host of different resources online that give guidance on how to create that. So I would recommend any civil society organization to look online, including the Girls Not Brides website. And then thirdly, I think one of the biggest barriers we face is, particularly at the local and community level, is the understanding of why it's important to address child marriage. Because sure, you can have the capital telling you that it's illegal, but that doesn't mean anything if it's just an abstract message coming down. So I would say thirdly, a really key point is around raising awareness, building education, working within the local community, working with local decision makers and local influential people and champions to explain why it's so important we address child marriage and why this can help not just the girl, but why it helps her community, why it helps her family, why it helps everyone around her. And I think that's the real way that civil society will help to see change.
Thank you, Zoe. I wanted to have just kind of a short follow-up on that. So in our last session with Christine, one of the callers really spoke to the issue of child marriage, and he referred to Nigeria. He was calling from Nigeria, that, you know, there are religious leaders as well as those in the legislature who are openly married to children. So, you know, in that setting, it's very difficult for the enforcement of these laws and policies to actually move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, that raises a challenge in itself, because I think there's one strategy where you can be quite critical of what's happening, and there's another where you can look towards the positive. And you may have some religious leaders who are married, but you have others who also stand up and advocate against child marriage. And I think working with those religious leaders to show that it is okay not for that not to happen, and to explain why, is another strategy to get around that.
Okay, thank you. So according to the brief, child protection is grounded in children's right and the protection of all girls and boys from birth to adulthood. To protect the best interest of children, approaches need to be age appropriate and recognize children's evolving capacities. So, and you say that they need to be tailored to the specific child marriage risks that are associated or experienced by children of those different ages. Will you give a kind of an example of what an age appropriate intervention might look like?
Thank you, Linda. So when we talk about children's evolving capacities, an example of that might be a child's verbal capacity, a child's ability to read or to write, a child's developmental stage. At what stage is the child at, and at what stage is the child able to understand interventions that might be being put in place for them and for their protection. So examples can be for thinking through how a child might be able to come and raise a concern that they are suffering abuse, or that they are living in fear of a certain kind of violence that they might be experiencing. So some organisations set up child-friendly spaces, for example, particularly for younger children, spaces where children, there are age-appropriate resources there. There's trained professionals in that space who are able to communicate well with children of that age, communicating with children about what their rights are, communicating with children about what their rights actually are, and in a way that they can understand. So using child-friendly language, sometimes that might be simplified language, sometimes that might be using images. I think also, as well as age, and making sure that we have interventions that are age appropriate, we can also think about gender sensitive approaches. We can also think about children who are living with disabilities. What kind of interventions how can we make sure that the interventions that we put in place for children actually work for those specific children and work for their lived experience and what they're going through? How can it make sense to them and be something that really isn't one size fits all, but is actually able to support and care for that child specifically.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hannah. So one of the things that we do with our Ask for Girls Club is we kind of take a unified approach to sexuality, to life skills, to human rights education, and use that approach to empower young women and girls. And that is kind of rooted in an evidence-based educational programming. And so I want to connect that to a statement that you made in the brief, which you said in recent years, child protection agencies have broadened their approach to include gender transformation and adolescent girls' empowerment. And so from what you have seen, how do these programs like Ask for Girls and other adolescent girls' empowerment programs protect girls, and what research exists to support that conclusion? So Zoe, do you want to take that question?
Oh, sure. Sorry, I was waiting for Hannah to jump in there. Sure. So in terms of looking at how programs protect adolescent girls, and I think I will hand over to Hannah to talk about safeguarding in particular, but at Girls Not Brides, we do have a sort of multi-strategy approach to how we think we should end child marriage, and it tends to fall into 4 different categories. And one of these categories is working to empower and support girls so that girls know their rights, they have safe spaces in order to talk to others and discuss the challenges that they may be experiencing in their day-to-day life, and opportunities to mentor with other girls and work alongside others to know how they can speak up and other opportunities that are available to them. And this is something that we see as really critical in working to an end to child marriage in all different regions and countries. And this goes alongside a number of other strategies that we think are important, which include providing services to girls, including making sure they have access to education, access to healthcare, access to SRHR, and of course, access to child protection. And that would align with support from their community and a solid legal and protection approach. So within that empowerment section, it is really important that we look at the safeguarding elements and what makes programming safe for girls. And Hannah, I know, has done a lot of work on this in the past, so I will just hand over to Hannah to talk about the safeguarding elements of programming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the way that we think about safeguarding at Girls Not Brides is we think about our responsibility to ensure that anyone who is participating in projects or programs can do so safely in a way that respects their agency and ability to participate, but that also means that we are not causing anyone further harm. Some of the ways that we consider doing that is things like ensuring that anyone who participates in our activities is informed of what their rights are, is informed of how to raise concerns if they're worried about something, that we have planned and thought through what happens if someone is worried about harm that's being caused to them. What happens if something happens to them because of their participation in a certain activity or project? Do we know what referral services are available in that area? Do we know, do we have all the relevant details that we might need for that individual adolescent or child to ensure that we can offer them the best protection and support possible following any kind of concern for their safety? Another thing that we have discussed and thought through doing is looking at, particularly in empowerment activities for adolescent girls, thinking about what else is going on in that context at the same time around social norm changes and gender transformative approaches. Because if this is done hand in hand, we're going to be able to have a stronger, more holistic approach to ensuring that those who are participating can also be protected within their own communities and won't be seen as that their participation won't be seen as something to be used against them.
So thank you, Hannah. I mean, one of the things that we have in one of our sites in particular, we talked to girls a bit about their rights and their protections, specifically as it relates to attending school. And we're fortunate enough to have kind of a connection with the school, although we don't work directly with the school in this community. And the girls kind of told us that they felt that when they were inappropriately touched by boys, when they're in the classroom or outside of the classroom or on school property, that the teachers essentially did not respond. And so we were just kind of able to elevate that a little bit to work with other people in the community so that we can begin to help teachers understand how to appropriately respond to that and what action should be taken to protect girls in that situation. And so we've experienced a bit of that. But I think there's certainly more work to be able for us to do to understand like the broader context in the community and to begin to work to change the norms that these girls have to live with, both from, I think, internally in terms of how they feel about themselves and externally in terms of how the community understands what their role is in the community and the importance of protecting these children. So
I think that's, oh, sorry, Linda. I was just going to add, I think that's a really, really good example. And the way that we try to think about it is that it's not just what we're doing in our activities and projects and programs, it's how we do it. And if the how can add to the what we're actually doing and what we're aiming for, then what a great example of the transformative change that we're trying to achieve.
So thank you. So just a reminder, if you'd like to ask any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to include them. So we talked a bit about different strategies, especially on the national level, but one of the questions that we have from the audience is that the brief mentions one strategy of legislative policy and budget advocacy. As new legislation is passed, how can we make sure that these laws are enforced, particularly in rural areas that may be more detached from the central government?
I think I can jump in. I think that's a great question. And I think, that really comes back to looking at those three elements I discussed earlier and building on them. So how can we really work with others to develop a strong, clear advocacy strategy that can change the particular context that you're working within? And I know in this child protection brief in particular, we touched upon budget advocacy as being a really critical area of that. And it's something that has not traditionally been done that much in the child marriage sector, as it were. And it's really started to kick off a little bit more recently. And it's been really exciting seeing some of our members working on that and the results that they've had. And the way that they have worked specifically is by analysing what their government's budget is spent on in terms of support for adolescent girls. So looking at, is the majority of it spent in the education department, is more of it in the child protection department or the health department, and then assessing the gaps that are there and seeing how actually what we need is targeted interventions in the education sector under these budgetary policies in order to make sure that child marriage is included. We know that child marriage is a barrier to education, and that education really helps girls step out of child marriage as well. So by putting money into that program, we can both support an end to child marriage and support girls' education. So it's really advocating how these strategies can help achieve multiple objectives that the government may have. And by putting their money into cross-sectoral strategies, they can really help to achieve a myriad of different aims, not just child marriage, not just education, for example.
No, don't stop. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and it's been amazing to see how these organizations have really analyzed the budgets on this and then worked out the exact gap that is needed and advocated for that to go forward with the appropriate ministries. So that could also be looking at ministries that I think the gender sector haven't traditionally engaged with, like finance officers and the department that look specifically at budget and finance, the Treasury, and seeing how to engage that. So often it can be stretching and looking beyond practices that you're comfortable with and exploring new routes for engagement. One report, for example, that came out a few years ago was the World Bank did a big study on the economic impact of child marriage. And that really showed that governments could save billions by stopping child marriage and allowing girls to really fulfill their potential and enter in to the workforce that way. So it's looking at slightly different areas and ways to advocate and lobby that could grab government's attention and see that change shift.
I think I remember that there was, I think they did kind of a big graphic on the dollar amount that it costs the world if we cannot fully engage girls economically as part of that. But I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier about the strategy that organizations have used to evaluate budgets and then move forward to kind of developing advocacy after they develop an understanding of those budgets. Is there a resource that you might have for organizations that are looking to take a similar approach in their country that they can use to begin to address or to evaluate the budgets of their even local, national governments?
Yeah, really good question. So what we've started to look at this over the last couple of years. As I mentioned, it's quite a new approach in some ways in the child marriage sector. So we have been taking learnings from budget advocacy that has happened in other sectors and then adapt it on how we want to use it to work on child marriage. And over the past year or so, that has involved a number of trial runs where we've been funding small case studies and trialing that work out of a number of national civil society organizations doing the work in a select number of countries across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And that actually has some really positive results. That report has been published. You should be able to find it on the Girls Not Brides website. And following that, we're seeing how we can scale up some of these learnings and trainings to support a wider variety of organizations taking it forward. So I think what in the process at the moment of seeing how we can adapt those resources and bring it to a wider audience, but we will certainly be sharing everything online and via our mail send out when it comes. So I would just encourage you all to sign up for the Girls Not Brides newsletter, and you'll hear all the latest information on it that way. And alternatively, if you have a particular interest, do reach out to me after this call, and I can put you in touch with my colleague who works more specifically on budget advocacy.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. So could you talk to me or talk to us a little bit? You mentioned in the brief this idea of engaging men and boys. And could you go into a little bit of detail about how you suggest that men and boys are engaged to begin to change some of the stigmas that are ingrained, and what advice you would give for people interested in having similar conversations with their own families?
Sure, I can certainly jump in on the first half of that question. And it's really important that we work on programs that work with men and boys to address some of those really harmful social and gender norms. And especially because it's so entrenched in how the communities that girls live within act. Men and boys form such a big part of that community. We need to be able to work with them in order to support these girls. And there's a whole host of ways that we've seen Girls Not Brides members do this, which have been really inspirational and really innovative and exciting, and have actually seen some really good results. So we've had, I don't know if you've heard of Promundo, but they've done work particularly with Abad in Lebanon on creating manuals on how you can run trainings and workshops with men and boys to explore these concepts of the different gender roles and gender equality, and why it is such a benefit when girls are empowered and they don't have to marry, and how men and boys can support in this journey. So seeing that social norms change supported at the community level is one really important step. Something else that we have seen reported that has had really interesting results has been programs that actually run theatre shows, or they do radio or songs and use media to engage and excite people on this topic, get people interested, get people talking and thinking through methods and means that are a little bit more interesting than just maybe another lecture at school. So there's a whole host of different strategies, and it's been, I think it is challenging because social norms change is something that takes a long time. You don't see results overnight, and that can make it really difficult to get funding. Often donors and governments want shorter turnaround and where they can see where their money is working. So there's something to be said for really working to support these kinds of programs so that more money will eventually trickle into it, and we can do more on social norms and really help shift some of those ideas and attitudes at the community level. I don't know if Hannah, you have any thoughts in particular when working directly with children and their families on this?
I'm so sorry, I just got kicked off the call. I'm not sure if anyone else did.
Okay, no, you're back. Hopefully not. All right.
I
So
was just, yeah.
go ahead, Zoe.
I was just wanting to ask kind of if you had any thoughts or insights into how it might be helpful to, if families wanted to engage in some of these conversations themselves around working with men and boys on challenging sort of social and gender norms.
I think it's a really good question. I think that so some of the advice that has been provided following these kinds of programs and these kinds of interventions is I think that some of the narratives can be around what men can explicitly gain from having equality with women. But I think that there's something to be said for trying to address it as looking at men as agents of change and not looking at men and masculinities in a blaming or a shaming way, but actually trying to promote positive change from men and boys around how women and girls are viewed and around women and girls' roles. I think also thinking about men as trying to encourage a narrative around men being equals rather than the saviors of women, and trying to promote a view that actually we are and should be working towards the same goal. Some of the activities that have been mentioned in the larger working paper on this topic have included things like have encouraging fun activities for men and boys on role, and for girls on roles that might be traditionally viewed as either male or female. So, for example, football competitions for girls, cooking competitions for men and boys, things like that, to help engage on a smaller, more community-based level, trying to help show that actually we can all do very similar things. And that we can promote equality in that kind of way.
That's pretty awesome. I love the competition aspect of that. So one of the things that we've seen is that we've had tremendous support from men in communities for our work and for everything that they can do to support girls. But what we see less of is women in the position to be able to advocate for girls. And in the example I'll give of that is that when we work often with schools, and we find that the head teacher at the school is almost, and I'm only speaking of Ghana, but the head teacher at the school is almost always a man. And so, even though there's a lot of opportunity and we find a lot of support among men, we find less examples of role models that are part of these girls' lives that will help them understand what it is possible for them to achieve. So let me just kind of back up and talk a little bit about, we were talking about norms here and changing those norms. So what approach or approaches would you argue are most important or effective for changing norms in regards to child marriage? So we've talked about some here. Are there any that you think are important that we should also discuss?
Zoe, do you want to go ahead?
Okay. I think when we're talking about addressing social norms, it's really hard to decide or pick one that works better than another. And I think especially when it comes to addressing child marriage, it's so context specific and it varies so much country to country and community to community and region to region. That's something that works really well in one place may not work in another place, and that has to be acknowledged. But having said that, I think there are a few areas that we at Girls Not Brides have seen across the board that seem to be slightly more effective in general. And some of those would be looking, for example, at thinking about programs that we can really scale up. So those that are effective, and that if slightly more money is invested in them, we can scale it up, increase the reach of that program so that it actually has a larger impact for more girls. And these are the kinds of programs that governments and philanthropic donors and organizations are often more interested in funding. So from that perspective, that is an area that is interesting to explore. Another area I think is something that we've seen has higher impact is where there is that multi-sectoral approach that really looks at the holistic needs that a girl has and tries to encompass all of them or as many as possible within that program. So not only looking at some of those social norms change, which may include, for example, safe spaces or community engagement programs, but also looking at how that girl can be supported to access reproductive health and rights services and information, how she can access education, how she can access justice, and seeing a program that really looks at her as a whole person, not just one small part. And then finally, maybe slight shift away from social norms and more into my area, which is around advocacy, is actually on the importance of advocating to governments and decision makers on the importance of this, because if we don't have those decision makers brought in to why it's important to work on social norms, they won't invest in it, they won't show support for it. And we do need that to an extent in order to have a bit of support to help us get off the ground. So I would argue that there is benefit in speaking out, raising awareness in whatever way that you can on how these programs are working so that we can push that forward into a wider, longer term sustainable change.
Okay, thank you. Was there anything else you'd like to add, Hannah?
Just to add also that where there is support or where there is pockets of the community that are mobilized to support these kind of programs and to support changing social norm initiatives, to foster that as much as possible, even if it's something that is might seem small, but to support and to encourage that thinking, especially from community leadership, for example, that can have we've seen that can have a very big and important change as well.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things that we've experienced as we've tried to bring our girls clubs into different communities, working with our partners, is that oftentimes we find two distinct type of communities. We find communities that require us to essentially provide some sort of support for leadership in the community, if I can say it in the best way possible, in order for us to be able to come and work in that community. But then we find other communities that welcome us with open arms. And we have really tried to, as part of our work, encourage members of the community to be a part of everything that we do. And we hope that by doing that, we can begin to change those norms. So as part of the Girls Club, some of the sessions, we work on teaching them how to sew reusable pads. And when we do our community engagement at the beginning of the project, and we talk about this, many times members of the community will say, well, can we sit in on this session so we can learn how to do this too? And so, we try to strike a balance between giving the girls a safe space to talk about whatever it is they want to talk about, but also to encourage members of the community to come in to help with registration, to help with projects, to be a part. And this is, I think, very different from many communities, because this is not something that they've experienced in the past. And this is something that for me, as part of ACE's world, what I feel almost most proud of, because we're beginning to change the way these communities think about their role in supporting girls and helping girls. And it's something that, I'm super proud of as, we talk about this.
And in doing that, you're demonstrating the change, which is so different from just talking about it.
Yeah, so thank you. So let me talk about we talked a little bit about investment and and this is a question from our audience, what does investing in child marriage prevention look like? And do you feel that prevention as opposed to intervention is more effective? So whichever of you would like to take that one.
I'll jump in. Again, I think it's hard. It's a hard challenge between prevention and protection, because I think both are needed at different times. And we have examples of some of our member organizations who've done very important prevention of work. So for example, we have Childline India, and they actually run a phone line where girls can call up if they are at immediate risk of getting married. And then the team will go out and talk to the family, talk to the community involved, and try and find a solution where the girl doesn't have to get married. And that step of intervention is really important for that individual girl to help prevent her from getting into child marriage at that step. But then, of course, prevention itself and really addressing the causes of child marriage and preventing that being a viable option altogether is what we ultimately are aiming for as a community. We want to see a world where girls are completely free to choose if, when, and who they marry, and child marriage isn't something that has to cross their path. And I think I sort of touched on it briefly earlier, but there is a number of different ways that we can work together to do that. And I think it's coming back to this theory of change that Girls Not Brides members have put together, which involves looking at empowering the girl and really supporting her to understand her rights, her opportunities, and find her voice. It's about involving the community, addressing harmful social and gender norms, working with men and boys, working with religious leaders. And then 3, working to make sure that girls are really provided with services so they have at their fingertips what they need to live healthy, fulfilled lives throughout their life, not just as a child. And then for making sure that there are solid legal and policy frameworks in place that support the legal side of that as well. So there's a number of different steps that are so important. And I think investing in any of those 4 strategies is a really helpful way forward when we're looking at ending child marriage.
Okay.
I think as well, if we think about the child being at the center of all of the interventions that we're talking about, of course, trying to prevent any harm from occurring is going to be the preferred option in the first place. But we know that we can't do that at all times and that this is happening. And so if we are able to respond in a way that is child-centered, that is rights-based, that respects the needs and the wishes of the child, we can try and do the best that we possibly can to ensure that further harm isn't caused and that the harm that is being caused is reduced as much as possible.
So to talk about that and to go back to the Girls Not Brides theory of change a little bit, I was looking at it recently and looking at this issue of specifically, how do we support girls who are already married? I think for us, what we see when we look for funding for different projects, oftentimes the funding is related to something like education. So for our current funding in particular, the focus is keeping girls in school. So what that does is, by nature of keeping girls in school, it excludes those girls who might need to be a part of the project even more. And I wonder if you have experience with projects that are really focused on these girls who are already out of school, who are already married? How have you been able to help them, or how have organizations been able to better support those girls and to find funding to support those girls?
I'll jump in quickly here. So I don't know, Zoe, if you are aware of any particular projects or organizations working on this at the moment, but if I can just share some of the issues that we talk about at Girls Not Brides, is really trying to make sure that those intersecting issues, as intersecting systems of oppression of girls who are married, aren't forgotten about, and that actually there is a focus on providing those basic needs and basic services that all girls should get, whether they're married or not. So education, the right healthcare. We know that girls who are married will suffer in various different aspects of their lives because of the fact that they are married. And so we do have a focus, and we do have discussions on how we can make sure that that's not forgotten about, and that actually there is enough resource put into ensuring that those basic needs are still met and are still cared about.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to add anything, Zoe?
I think Hannah has said it all, but just from the perspective of looking at child marriage at the global level, we have seen working to support married girls come up more and more recently over the last.
Oh, I think Zoe's connection is gone.
Yep. So is there anything, hopefully she'll be able to join us briefly again.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's a question that came up, and it was about kind of this relationship between child marriage and peace and security. And I was wondering if you would like to kind of talk about that a bit.
Sure. I think it's a really interesting question. So what we know about child marriage is that the risk of child marriage and the consequence of child marriage is exacerbated in humanitarian contexts, and looking at addressing and context of conflict, and looking at addressing both the responses and preventions of child marriage in contexts of conflict have their own challenges. We know that it's also contexts of conflict shift and change a lot, and that often some of the first issues that girls that are faced are the reduction of women's rights and the reduction of women and girls' autonomy and their ability to exercise their agency. So I think that whether or not the fundamental principles of how we want to address child marriage will remain very similar, whether it's a context of peace or of conflict. Listening to the child, understanding the child's lived experiences and the context that they're going through, what kind of services are available. So in humanitarian contexts, if it's a long-standing conflict, there might be services that are that have been available and are developed well, or there might not be any services, and therefore the resources that you're going to be relying on are going to be much more community-based than broader than that. Yeah, I think, does that answer some of your question on peace?
I think it does. So let's say, the next question I have really focuses on the Middle East and North Africa, which is not an area that I'm really familiar with, but I will share the question. What are some of the biggest challenges or concerns that you face when developing initiatives to respond to prevent and respond to the prevention of child marriage in the Middle East and or North Africa, or both? Or was there also a commitment from any government end child marriage from these areas. And so there's a lot wrapped up in there. So I would say just put it on the part that makes most sense for you to address.
Sure. So I think that contexts within the Middle East and North Africa vary greatly. So there are some contexts where you have long drawn out conflict, others where there isn't any conflict. And so I think that to address child marriage across MENA as a whole, we still have to think about being context specific, and ensuring that we understand the increased risks that children face when they're living in humanitarian contexts. I think, so if I think of some examples, in the broader working paper that we published alongside this brief, there were examples from Lebanon of work done with the community to address gender and social norm changes and to address child marriage. And the work in order to be able to carry out the work with women in the community particularly, there was a lot of work done on consultation with the women in the community on what would work best and how that would happen. So for example, they worked out that the timings that they were having their meetings talking about child marriage didn't work because they were having them in the morning. And actually the women of that community needed to be present at home and to carry out childcare and household responsibilities. And so once they had said, actually, we need it to be later in the day, they were able to participate, and the program got a lot more traction and was able to carry on. I think that it still will go back to being context specific. I think that there are specific challenges that are faced in the Middle East and North Africa region, which might be different from other regions, particularly around gender norms and around protracted crises. In terms, we don't do any direct work ourselves as Girls Not Brides in the Middle East and North Africa region. And I know that Zoe, I know you've just come back, Zoe, sorry, I think that you got kicked out. But we're talking about the Middle East and North Africa region, and there's part of the question that's been posed is around, I think it was around governments officially and publicly committing to ending child marriage. And I know that you had something that you wanted to mention on that.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry, I just kept getting kicked out of Zoom, but I seem to be back now, so hopefully I'll stay. Yes, absolutely. So it was just to say on the topic of commitments that there are a whole number of international accountability mechanisms at the Human Rights Council, the UN General Assembly, that a whole variety of different governments have signed up to, including those from North Africa and the Middle East. And these are commitments specifically around ending child marriage on important aspects that relates to the girl child. And you can go online to the Girls Not Brides country atlas, find the country that you're looking for, and in that list it will have information about all the international conventions, commitments, resolutions that countries signed up to do. And those are a really good tool to use if you're lobbying or advocating to your government around child marriage. You can hold them to account for those commitments they've made at the global level.
That's a great, we basically used it in one of our trainings recently. So
amazing.
To recommend, I highly recommend just to even have a better understanding of what the situation is in globally and in specific countries. It's a really great tool, and I think it's fun to use. So thank you for sharing that with us. All right. So unfortunately, our time is just about out. I want to ask both Hannah and Zoe if they'd like to make any closing remarks before we end.
I just want to thank you, Linda, for your invitation to us, and to thank all of you for attending. I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and I'm really glad that we can talk about the importance of child protection and child marriage and the interlinkage between. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
And just to echo Hannah, it's been really interesting talking to you all. Thank you so much for inviting us. And if you are interested in the Girls Not Brides Child Protection Brief, do check it out on our website. And we would always welcome any of your thoughts on it.
Okay, so thank you. So thank you both for your time and for an informative discussion. I'd like to also thank everyone who joined us for this discussion and for the questions that you shared, including the ACES World team, who worked so hard to make this possible, this event possible. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.